We sold our house along with almost everything we owned, and we packed up the RV to live a lifestyle on the road. Now we're free from sticks and bricks and that old life we used to know. Come and join on our adventures, all the places that we'll go. And living in the RV is sublime. Destination Fulltime.
Make sure you keep your phones and gadgetry handy because we've had lots of orb activity last little bit, so try and get some orb photographs and or videos. Okay, we are across the street from the old O-L-D-E Pink House. This was designed and built by James Haversham Jr. For himself, his wife, and his 3 daughters. All 18,000 square feet of it. I'm an only child. I grew up in an 825 square foot house, and I would not know what to do with all this space. But as you can probably guess, because this is a pretty astute crowd we've got tonight, you probably already guessed this is no longer a single family dwelling. It is an inn, a ballroom that doubles as a dining room, tavern, restaurant. Down in the basement, more restaurant, more tavern, and a spa. Place is lovely. Very great food in there. I recommend it highly, but you got to get like 3 months out for reservations. The bar is first come, first serve, but never like my back to the door. Knives, check. No forks. We don't know why. It's always forks that go missing. But it happens often enough, they don't even get mad. They know if they go down the hallway, cubby hole to the left, they'll hear the little pitter patter and the giggles again when they open a cubby hole. There are their forks. Now, if you go on YouTube, search the old Pink House, look at their surveillance videos, and you'll see in the hallways little balls of light, we call them orbs, going up and down the hallways. We think those little balls of light represent the spirits of those little mischievous children. So that's a cute story. Next one, not so much. Now, do you see where all that flammage is? That's my word, you can't use it. Flammage. That's the tavern. It's next to the restaurant. They share a men's room and a ladies' room. Which line is always the longest?
Ladies.
Great mysteries of life. So when it's in season, Saturday night, the line to the ladies' room sometimes starts backing up into the tables. And so a manager or a server will come out, hey ladies, there's another women's room down in the basement. Bad idea. Mrs. Haversham, wife of the builder, was a very, very beautiful young bride, but she was also a very, very jealous young bride. She was constantly accusing her young husband of what they call today dalliances. 130 some odd years later, she has not gotten any better about her jealousy. Because she thinks you're prettier than she was, she'll hold the stall door shut on you. 20, 30 minutes. Doesn't matter who your cell phone carrier is. There's no signal in the basement. You're there for the full count of 20, 30 minutes. But we men always attempt to throw our ladies every need. We'll be going, she's been gone like half an hour. I've already eaten both our desserts. Or could she possibly be? We'll send a waitress down there to check on you, and hopefully by that time you're shaking off the cold sweats. You've learned your lesson. You can run upstairs and yell at Boudreaux for eating your ice cream. My advice, stay upstairs. we are in front of the infant grave right here. Child was 9 weeks old, died of yellow fever, no name. Our infant mortality rate was so high back in the period that they didn't even name their children till they're 6 to 9 months old because they didn't want to get attached. That's horrific. Well, in any case, this as a whole was closed to fresh occupants in 1853. By that time we had somewhere between 8 and 10,000 people interred here. I give you a kind of a fuzzy number because we're not really kind of sure how many were in the mass grave for the yellow fever. So it's about 2,000 gap. I'd probably guess more than 10,000, but that's what they claim. Other than the mass yellow fever grave, there are 2 ways to be interred in Colonial Park Cemetery. There were the above ground brick structures, the mausoleums, and then you've got the regular graves. Neither one was exactly what you were expecting. For instance, you go to New Orleans, they've got a high water table. You dig a couple inches down, you hit water. You're going to be put into a metal casket. It might have wood grain, but it's metal. You'll be sealed and locked, lowered into a concrete vault, which will also be sealed and locked. I don't know where they think you're going, but they are going to seal and lock you in every step of the way. You're going to occupy that real estate till the trumpets sound, right? Okay. Not back in the colonial period, but then they would have put your body into a pine wood box called a coffin. They would have buried you 6 foot down into the naked soil, covered you up with soil. With Savannah's heat and humidity, you'd be lucky if you and your little box lasted 10, 12 months. You discombobulate, decompose, compress, the whole kit and caboodle will be about as thick as your hand is wide. Knowing that, if Uncle Oscar passed away and you buried him, a couple years later Aunt Edna passed, well, as long as you only dug 5.5 feet, you could put her in the same grave. In this fashion, 4, 5, the record is 6 family members in one grave, layered like lasagna. I'll have you off of lasagna by the time this is over with. This story only explains why it's crowded. It does not explain why it is haunted. The haunts were the fault of the American Civil War. All right, let's part a little ways, let these folks through here.
You're good.
Oh, okay, thank you, thank you. Now, I don't know how many of you have been in the service. I guesstimate some of you and some of you haven't, so I'm just going to say this for everybody. Throughout history, from the time of the Greeks and the Spartans to the modern era, officers and enlisted folk have been treated ever so slightly differently. I see some giggles. So, when we were occupied by the Union forces at the end of the Civil War and for a while afterwards, the Union officers got to sleep at Hampton Lillibridge's place, the Owens Thomas house, better hotels. The enlisted folk got to sleep here. And nobody is surprised. So let's put a finer point on that for everybody. These folks, when they got to Savannah, had been fighting 1.5 years, 2.5 years at that point. They're wearing the same uniforms, some of them the same farm clothes they volunteered in. So their clothing was in tatters. It was in bad shape. Well, Sherman outran his supply lines. And here's a problem. That meant that they had no wool blankets, no tents, no winter uniforms. It got unseasonably down to 17 degrees that year, record cold in Savannah. Soldiers figured they needed a shelter more than the dead, so they broke the locks off of the mausoleums, drugged the bodies out, burned them for heat, and then slept in the mausoleums. This produced a lot more unhappy souls. During the day,
Can't imagine.
well, bored soldiers are not happy soldiers, and so they would take their bayonets off their rifles, they carve on the headstones, mess with people's names, but mostly they mess with the dates, make it look like people lived 1,000 years or whatnot. But often, in their frustration, they would take and break the headstones off at their bases and scatter them throughout the cemetery. When folk finally got back in after the occupation was over, they couldn't find their loved ones. They could find their headstone, but it wasn't where the body was. So this was very frustrating and crushing to them. And so they took and put all the headstones on the wall of the old police barracks on the far side of the cemetery. We literally have a wall of headstones, and that produced even more unhappy spirits. 14 years ago, when I first started doing these tours, I would take my guests all into the cemetery. I would show you the broken locks, vandalized headstones, the wall of headstones. Added a lot to the tour, in my humble opinion. But just a couple of years ago, one of my old high school teachers got into his little pumpkin head Oh, that's disrespectful to the dead. We can't have tourists going into the cemetery at night. They might kick over headstones, dig up bodies. The Yankees are coming. So he got together with his little buddy who lives across the street from 507 East St. Julian Street. Yeah, it's my nemesis. And every morning when the sun comes up, they take the padlock off, but every night when the sun goes down, they put the padlock back on again. We can't go in because they think we're going to do disrespectful things to the dead. Now, if you want to see real disrespect, I'm going to show you something. Don't follow me. Stay right where you are. Just turn in place, and I'm coming right back here to explain it to you. Just watch where I go. There's a three-sided iron spike at the end of my foot. That iron spike is a surveyor's pin. That marks the edge of the cemetery. See, back in the old days, all of Savannah streets, including Abercorn here, were dirt. They only had to handle horses, carriages, wagons, but then we started getting cars and trucks and buses, so they took up several rows of headstones, added them to the ones from the Civil War, left the bodies, widened Abercorn, paved it, put in that granite curb, put in the voodoo brick sidewalk. New Orleans has voodoo, we have voodoo. So now we have a bus stop on top of the dead. We've got parking places on top of the dead, and if you haven't figured it out, we're all standing on top of the dead. See right here, right depression is? That's a grave caving in. That's behind you is a whole grave caving in. Everywhere you see the depression in the bricks means from constant foot traffic, somebody's pine wood coffin lid has caved in. You're now walking on their face, chest, stomach, or worse.
Good job, ass.
I think it's way more disrespectful than anything I would have done by showing you some headstones.
Yeah.
So we ready to jaywalk and get out of here? Okay. Cross this way.
Living in the RV is sublime. Destination